The passage of time often has a peculiar way of shifting our perspective on the figures who seem to stand like unmoving monoliths against the rushing current of human history. When a monumental presence finally departs from the earthly stage, it leaves behind a vacuum that is naturally filled by a collective, reflective curiosity. For generations, millions of people around the globe woke up every single day to the reality of a world presided over by a singular, enduring matriarch whose image was woven into the very fabric of modern civilization. Her countenance graced the currency of nations, her official residences became global landmarks, and her periodic addresses to the public served as markers for the passing of eras. Yet, when the heavy curtains of statecraft and solemn duty are drawn back, we are often left wondering about the quiet, unrecorded moments that existed beneath the heavy crown. We find ourselves contemplating the ordinary rhythms of a life lived under an extraordinary spotlight, pondering what transpired when the cameras were turned off, the official dignitaries had departed, and the grand banquet halls fell completely silent. It is within these quiet intervals, far removed from the grand tapestries of international diplomacy and historic pronouncements, that the true essence of a person is often preserved. The grand narratives of history tell us what leaders accomplished, what treaties they signed, and what crises they navigated, but they rarely capture the intimate, domestic choices that ground a human being to the everyday world. To explore these hidden corners is not to diminish the grandeur of a historic legacy, but rather to search for a relatable thread that connects the ruler to the ruled, bridging the immense gulf between an ancient institution and the simple realities of daily existence. As we prepare to dive deeper into this fascinating exploration of history, legacy, and the surprising culinary traditions that bound global leaders together behind closed doors, we invite you to become a permanent part of our community. If you find yourself captivated by these forgotten glimpses into the past and enjoy uncovering the human stories behind world-changing figures, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for this journey through time. When we consider a life that spanned nearly a century, it becomes almost impossible to comprehend the sheer volume of change witnessed by a single individual. To live for 96 years is achievement enough, but to occupy the highest symbolic office of a global power for more than 7 decades of that lifespan is a feat unparalleled in the modern era. This remarkable longevity meant that her reign became the background music to the lives of multiple generations, a constant and predictable anchor in a world that was radically transforming at a breakneck pace. From the rebuilding efforts of the post-war era to the dawn of the digital age, she remained a steady, silent observer of human progress, her presence bridging the gap between a bygone world of empires and the interconnected global village of the 21st century. For 70 long years, she met with prime ministers, hosted presidents, and witnessed the rise and fall of ideological walls, maintaining an enigmatic neutrality that left the world endlessly fascinated by what she might actually be thinking. This carefully maintained mystique was a deliberate tool of statecraft, ensuring that the crown remained a unifying symbol above the fray of temporary disputes, but it also meant that the public was left with a portrait composed almost entirely of formal photographs, staged processions, and highly structured public appearances. The sheer scale of this public persona created a strange paradox, where a woman who was one of the most photographed and talked about individuals in human history remained, in many ways, an absolute stranger to the billions of people who recognized her face instantly. This profound sense of mystery naturally breeds a deep and enduring curiosity about the mundane aspects of such a well-documented yet hidden life. When an individual achieves an impressive mythical status in the cultural consciousness, the human mind instinctively seeks out the small, relatable details that remind us of our shared humanity. We find ourselves asking questions that might seem trivial on the surface, but actually represent a desire to understand the person behind the historic title. We wonder about the quiet morning routines, the personal preferences that were never written into official state protocols, and the simple comforts that provided solace during times of immense pressure. Among these domestic mysteries, perhaps none is more universally fascinating than the question of culinary taste, as food is the ultimate equalizer that touches the lives of monarchs and commoners alike. What does a person eat when they have access to the finest chefs in the world, when every imaginable delicacy can be brought to their table at a moment's notice, and when cost is absolutely no object? The assumption might be that such a life is filled exclusively with exotic ingredients, intricate multi-course banquets, and rare vintages served on silver platters by a small army of staff. However, history often reveals that those who occupy the highest pinnacles of luxury frequently crave the exact opposite, turning instead towards simplicity, comfort, and the unpretentious flavors of traditional home cooking. It was precisely this lingering curiosity about the private preferences of a global icon that led to a remarkable discovery buried deep within the vast digital archives of the modern internet. In an era where information flows freely and instantly across borders, ancient documents and forgotten historical artifacts can suddenly resurface in the most unexpected of places, sparking a renewed interest in the past. While browsing through a popular online discussion forum where millions of individuals share obscure historical trivia and personal anecdotes, an incredibly unique piece of history came to light, offering a rare and intimate glimpse into the domestic world of the palace. Floating around the digital universe was an authentic, historic recipe attributed directly to the late monarch herself, a document that promised to reveal exactly what she enjoyed serving during private moments of leisure and hospitality. This was not a recipe for an extravagant state dinner or an intricate confection designed to impress foreign royalty, but rather a simple, rustic formula for a traditional baked good known as drop scones, which are also frequently referred to in certain regions as Scotch pancakes. To the uninitiated, these treats might appear to be nothing more than a regional variation of a common breakfast staple, but to those familiar with culinary history, they represent a beloved piece of cultural heritage that has been passed down through generations. The sudden appearance of this recipe felt like a direct invitation from the universe to pause, reflect, and engage in a unique form of historical exploration that goes far beyond merely reading words on a page. It offered an opportunity to recreate a tangible piece of the past, to use one's own hands to measure out the exact ingredients that were once favored by a monarch, and to experience the very same aromas and flavors that drifted through royal kitchens decades ago. In a world that is constantly looking forward, there is a profound, almost comforting magic in stepping backward and honoring a historic legacy through the timeless art of cooking. This specific recipe carried with it an incredible pedigree, serving as a physical token of an extraordinary moment in international diplomacy that took place exactly 63 years ago, all the way back in the pivotal year of 1959. To truly understand the significance of this culinary artifact, one must understand the context of the era from which it emerged, a time when the world stood on the precipice of a new frontier. Caught between the lingering traditions of the mid-century and the rapid cultural shifts that were about to define the decades to follow, the year 1959 was a time of immense historical transition, characterized by events that would forever alter the geopolitical and cultural landscape of the globe. It was the fateful year when the tropical archipelago of Hawaii was officially admitted as the 50th state of the American Union, completing the modern map of the United States and signaling a new era of Pacific integration. In the realm of popular culture and media, television was rapidly cementing its status as the dominant storytelling medium of the age, a fact perfectly illustrated by the premiere of the very first episode of the iconic anthology series known as The Twilight Zone, which would go on to revolutionize science fiction and psychological television forever. It was against this vibrant backdrop of progress and cultural evolution that an extraordinary meeting took place, bringing together two of the most influential figures of the 20th century. A stunning black and white photograph from that very year captures the monarch standing alongside General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the President of the United States, during a period of close cooperation and mutual respect. The image portrays an undeniable warmth between the two leaders, hinting at a genuine friendship that existed beyond the rigid boundaries of official statecraft, a friendship that was cemented not just through grand political alliances, but through the sharing of simple, domestic pleasures that would leave a lasting impression for decades to come. The extraordinary photograph of the young British monarch and the American president standing side by side in the year 1959 serves as a stunning visual gateway into a deeper and far more fascinating narrative. It reveals that the recipe for these traditional drop scones was not merely a casual kitchen note, but a deliberate gift of personal hospitality extended from a queen to a head of state, signaling a level of comfort and genuine connection that rarely breaks through the stiff veneer of international relations. Armed with this historic formula and a profound sense of purpose, the journey from reading an old internet post to stepping into the physical kitchen began in earnest, driven by the desire to recreate the exact culinary experience that had once charmed the leader of the Western world. To embark on this experiment was to transform an abstract historical anecdote into a sensory reality, turning a kitchen counter into a space where the past could be tasted, smelled, and thoroughly evaluated. The process required a careful gathering of raw ingredients, each one serving as a building block for a dish that promised to bridge the immense gap between ordinary contemporary life and the private breakfast tables of royalty. Every component listed in the decades-old text carried a sense of tradition, calling for pantry staples that have remained largely unchanged for generations, yet still hold subtle secrets depending on which side of the Atlantic Ocean they are sourced from. The inventory of required ingredients was elegant in its simplicity, consisting of standard flour, caster sugar, fresh milk, whole eggs, cream of tartar, unsalted butter, and bicarbonate of soda, which is much more commonly referred to in everyday American households as basic baking soda. The first step in translating this historic document into a physical batter involved addressing the specific nomenclature of British baking, which often utilizes terms that can feel slightly foreign to those accustomed to modern American grocery stores. The recipe called explicitly for 4 tablespoons of caster sugar, an ingredient that is frequently labeled as superfine sugar in the United States, though it remains far less ubiquitous on American shelves than it is across the United Kingdom. To the untrained eye, sugar might seem like a uniform substance, but the precise crystal size of caster sugar plays an absolutely vital role in the delicate science of baking. Each individual grain of caster sugar is meticulously processed to be significantly smaller than regular granulated table sugar. Yet it remains distinctly larger and more structured than the powdery texture of confectioner's or powdered sugar. This unique intermediate size allows the crystals to dissolve with incredible ease when introduced to wet ingredients, ensuring a smooth, uniform distribution of sweetness throughout the batter without the risk of creating a gritty texture or leaving pockets of unresolved sugar crystals behind, with the caster sugar carefully measured. The next phase of the process was to combine it directly with the whole eggs and begin building the liquid foundation of the drop scone batter. The recipe then instructed the addition of 1½ cups of fresh milk, an amount that the original text noted was exactly equal to 2 traditional teacups, providing a charming reminder of the era and culture from which this culinary formula emerged. This initial measurement represented exactly 1/2 of the total volume of milk specified by the monarch's instructions, establishing a specific staging process that is common in older, highly precise baking methods. After thoroughly whisking the eggs, caster sugar, and the initial portion of milk together into a pale, frothy liquid, it was time to introduce the structural element of the dish. 3 full cups of all-purpose flour were measured and added to the bowl, followed immediately by the remaining 1½ cups of milk. This alternating method of combining the wet and dry ingredients is a classic baker's technique designed to prevent the flour from forming stubborn clumps, allowing the starch to absorb the liquid gradually and develop a beautifully cohesive structure without overworking the gluten, once the main bulk of the flour and milk had been successfully integrated into the expanding mixture. It was time to introduce the chemical leavening agents that would give the drop scones their characteristic rise and lightness. The recipe called for 2 teaspoons of baking soda alongside 3 teaspoons of cream of tartar, a combination that functions as a homemade version of modern baking powder. When these 2 specific compounds are mixed together in the presence of moisture, they initiate a fascinating chemical reaction, releasing carbon dioxide gas bubbles that become trapped within the matrix of the flour batter. To finalize the creation of this historic mixture, 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter were carefully melted over a low flame and poured directly into the bowl, adding a rich, velvety fat content to the formula. The entire mixture blended together with remarkable ease, transforming into a thick, luxurious batter that immediately filled the room with a familiar, comforting aroma. It was a moment of genuine surprise to realize that the raw mixture smelled exactly like classic, high-quality pancake batter, radiating a deeply inviting scent that instantly stimulated the appetite and heightened the anticipation for the final product. The physical consistency of the completed batter was notably smooth. Yet it was undeniably distinct from the types of batter most modern home cooks are accustomed to preparing on a regular basis. It sat firmly on the thicker side of the culinary spectrum, displaying a heavy, substantial body that was far less runny or fluid than standard American pancake batter. This density meant that the mixture would not spread out wildly upon making contact with a hot surface, but would instead maintain a compact, circular shape, which is precisely what allows drop scones to achieve their signature thickness. A unique challenge arose when looking at the historic text, as the original document provided absolutely no specific cooking instructions, temperatures, or time durations, leaving the modern cook to rely on intuition and historical research. After consulting the extensive archives of the British Broadcasting Corporation and analysing numerous discussions among historical cooking enthusiasts online, it became clear that the proper method was to treat them very much like traditional pancakes, because drop scones are traditionally meant to be quite small and delicate. A 1/4 cup measuring tool was selected to scoop the thick batter and drop it cleanly onto a hot pan that had been thoroughly greased with a layer of rich butter. The initial attempt at cooking the first scone provided a classic reminder of the universal laws of pancake making, demonstrating that regardless of who originally wrote the recipe, the first item to hit the pan is almost always a sacrificial failure. The pan's temperature had not yet fully stabilized, causing the exterior of the first scone to brown too quickly, while the dense interior remained slightly undercooked, resulting in a less than perfect specimen. Fortunately, this initial misstep allowed for a swift adjustment of the stovetop heat, and the second drop scone emerged from the pan looking infinitely better, boasting a gorgeous, uniform golden brown crust that signaled ideal heat distribution. The sheer volume of the batter was surprisingly immense, ultimately yielding a total of around 10 individual drop scones, a number that came after admitting that a few early pieces had to be completely discarded due to being burned rather severely during the temperature calibration process. Interestingly, the original historical document states that the recipe makes enough to serve 16 people, which implies that the scones were intended to be crafted on a much smaller, more delicate scale than the ones produced in this modern kitchen experiment. For a point of reference, the successfully cooked drop scones achieved a size of approximately 5 inches in diameter, making them a hearty and substantial treat. The entire cooking process, spanning from the initial measurement of the dry ingredients to the final scone being lifted from the hot pan, took an estimated 35 minutes of focused preparation and active cooking time. With a towering stack of golden, steaming drop scones finally resting on the plate, the long-awaited moment to experience this piece of royal history had officially arrived. Following the enthusiastic recommendations of culinary traditionalists who frequently discuss these regional dishes online, the decision was made to serve and consume them with a classic accompaniment of rich, creamy butter and sweet strawberry jam. Cutting into the first drop scone revealed a fascinating internal structure that was visibly and texturally distinct from the light, airy, and often fluffy nature of a standard American pancake. They were noticeably thicker, presenting a dense, moist interior that practically radiated a rich, buttery aroma into the air, tempting the senses before the first bite was even taken. The visual feedback alone confirmed that this was an entirely different class of pastry, one that promised a more substantial and satisfying bite than the average breakfast fare. Taking that very first bite brought about an immediate wave of genuine astonishment, as the sheer quality and deliciousness of the drop scones caught the senses completely off guard. There was an instant realization that these traditional treats possessed a depth of flavor that easily surpassed standard American pancakes, a comparison that might not seem incredibly difficult to win, given that many modern boxed pancake mixes often result in a bland, cardboard-like taste. In stark contrast, these historic drop scones delivered the exact experience of how a griddle-baked cake ought to taste, offering a delightful chewiness, combined with a dense, substantial consistency that felt remarkably similar to a high-quality, old-fashioned pound cake. The rich, velvety dollops of melting butter combined flawlessly with the bright, sweet notes of the strawberry jam, creating a harmonious balance of flavors that made it incredibly easy to understand why this specific dish had been deemed worthy of international diplomacy. The experiment proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the late monarch possessed an absolutely exceptional taste in everyday comforts, leaving behind a culinary legacy that is well worth preserving and sharing with the wider world. The profound delight of tasting these historically significant drop scones forces us to look past the boundaries of our own modern kitchens and examine the extraordinary historical figures who once shared this exact sensory experience. To understand why a simple recipe for Scotch pancakes carries such immense historical weight, one must examine the fascinating details of that legendary summer meeting in 1959 at the majestic estate of Balmoral Castle, nestled deep within the rugged Scottish Highlands. It was during this specific informal gathering that the young British monarch hosted General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a man whose life story is intrinsically woven into the very fabric of 20th century global history. Long before he became the 34th President of the United States, Eisenhower had earned his place in the annals of time as a towering military leader, serving as the supreme Allied commander in Europe during the dark and turbulent years of the Second World War. In that monumental role, he was the chief architect of Operation Overlord, the massive and precarious Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944 that ultimately turned the tide of the war against totalitarian forces and reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Europe forever. His leadership during the war earned him the boundless respect of global leaders and ordinary citizens alike, cementing his reputation as a man of immense duty, strategic brilliance, and quiet, unyielding determination. When the war finally concluded and the world transitioned into a fragile, complex peace, Eisenhower's immense popularity naturally propelled him into the sphere of American governance, where he served 2 terms as president during a period characterized by remarkable domestic economic growth and the chilling dawn of the Cold War. It was during his presidency that he travelled to the mist-shrouded valleys of Scotland to visit the British royal family at their private sanctuary, far removed from the public scrutiny of London or Washington. The atmosphere at Balmoral Castle was deliberately designed to be informal, offering a rare sanctuary where weary global leaders could let down their guard, step away from the grueling demands of statecraft, and engage in the simple pleasures of country life. It was during this relaxed retreat that the president was treated to an afternoon tea where the monarch personally prepared and served her favorite drop scones, utilizing a cherished family recipe that had been perfected in the royal kitchens over many years. Eisenhower was so thoroughly enchanted by the unique texture, richness, and comforting flavor of these small Scotch pancakes that he could not stop singing their praises. A reaction that clearly delighted his royal host. The profound impression left by that simple afternoon tea is beautifully documented in a historic letter sent by the monarch to the American president several months after his visit, specifically in January of 1960. This extraordinary piece of correspondence, which is safely preserved within the National Archives, reveals a wonderfully human and domestic side to a woman who spent her entire life projecting an aura of flawless royal majesty. In the letter, she wrote with genuine warmth, noting that seeing a photograph of the president in front of a barbecue grill had instantly reminded her of the promise she made at Balmoral to share her personal recipe for drop scones. She explicitly apologized for the lengthy delay in sending the document, explaining with a touch of dry humor that she had been searching for the exact proportions that would feed a proper gathering. The attached recipe was meticulously detailed, written out with the utmost care to ensure that the president's own kitchen staff could replicate the exact flavors he had enjoyed so thoroughly during his stay in the Scottish Highlands. This simple act of sharing a favorite family recipe represents a beautiful, fleeting moment of genuine human connection between 2 individuals who bore the immense, often isolating weight of global leadership on their shoulders. To truly appreciate the enduring legacy of the monarch who penned that letter, one must reflect upon her extraordinary biography and the deep-seated traditions that governed her remarkable 96 years of life. Born in London in the spring of 1926, she was never originally destined to occupy the throne, spending her earliest years in a relatively quiet corner of the royal family tree. However, the course of British history was forever altered in 1936 when her uncle, King Edward VIII, made the shocking and unprecedented decision to abdicate the throne in order to marry an American divorcee, thrusting her quiet father into the role of King George VI and placing the young princess directly in the line of succession. When the Second World War broke out, she refused to flee to safety, choosing instead to remain in her homeland and actively contribute to the war effort by joining the Auxiliary Territorial Service, where she trained alongside ordinary citizens as a driver and mechanic, demonstrating a profound dedication to public service that would define her entire life. Upon the untimely passing of her beloved father in 1952, she acceded to the throne at the tender age of 25, stepping into a role of immense responsibility at a time when the world was navigating the complex aftermath of a global conflict and the steady dissolution of an empire. Throughout her historic 70-year reign, she remained an unwavering symbol of stability, continuity, and quiet resilience, navigating decades of profound social, cultural, and technological transformation with a steadfast grace that earned her the deep admiration of people across the globe. Her personal life, though shielded by an impenetrable wall of royal protocol, was anchored by her enduring marriage to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, a union that spanned more than 73 years and provided her with a constant source of strength and support through countless national and personal trials. Together, they raised a large family, witnessed the dawning of the new millennium, and watched the world transition into a highly connected digital epoch. When her long and illustrious journey finally came to a peaceful end, the world paused to reflect on the passing of a true historical titan, a woman who had served as a living bridge to a bygone era of courage, duty, and refined tradition. The immense outpouring of global grief and respect that followed her departure underscored just how profoundly her presence had shaped the modern cultural consciousness. It is this grand, sweeping historical backdrop that makes the act of baking her drop scones in a contemporary kitchen feel so incredibly meaningful and profound. It reminds us that history is not merely a collection of cold dates, ancient treaties, and dusty political documents stored away in museum vaults, but a living, breathing tapestry that can be experienced through the simple sensory pleasures of our everyday lives. When we measure out the caster sugar, watch the baking soda react with the cream of tartar, and see the thick batter turn a beautiful golden brown on a hot pan, we are actively participating in a shared human tradition that once brought joy to a president and a queen in the summer of 1959. It shows that beneath the heavy weight of the crown and the immense responsibilities of governance, there lived a person who appreciated the simple comfort of a perfectly baked scone served with fresh butter and sweet strawberry jam. This culinary experiment bridges the massive chasm between the ordinary citizen and the extraordinary historical figure, offering a tangible, delicious connection to a life that was lived at the very center of the global stage for nearly a century. As this fascinating journey of historical exploration and culinary recreation draws to its final conclusion, we are left with a deeper appreciation for the small, domestic details that humanize the monumental figures of our past. While the grand secrets of real life and the intricate behind-the-scenes maneuvers of 20th century diplomacy may forever remain locked away from our view, we can find a unique solace in knowing that we can